Wood rots, mould creeps, moisture wins. That's the rule we're taught today. But, you know, medieval builders quietly broke that rule centuries ago. They dipped their timber in a dark, foul-smelling liquid that modern science would later recognize as brutally effective. No chemicals, no labs, just observation, patience, and a method so good that some of those wooden structures are still standing while modern buildings crumble. This isn't folklore. This is applied survival engineering. And honestly, once you hear how it worked, you'll never look at wood the same way again. How medieval builders fought mould without knowing mould. Medieval people didn't know what mould spores were. They didn't understand microbes, fungi, or decay at a cellular level. But they knew one thing with absolute clarity. Wet wood dies fast. Dry, treated wood lasts generations. So they experimented. Over decades and then centuries, they noticed that timber exposed to certain dark liquids resisted rot, insects, and that creeping green fuzz that destroys beams from the inside out. The solution they landed on wasn't fancy. It was wood tar, pitch, and resin-rich dips derived from heating timber slowly until its protective compounds bled out. Where this method was used and why it mattered. This timber treatment wasn't reserved for palaces. It was used anywhere failure meant disaster. Bridges, roof beams, foundations, ships. Water-facing structures relied on dipped wood because untreated timber would fail quickly. Ships are a perfect example. Salt water accelerates decay. Yet wooden ships lasted years because their hull timbers were saturated with pitch and tar. Mould, barnacles and boring insects struggled to survive on treated wood. The same logic applied to homes and public buildings. If you wanted a structure to outlive you, you treated the wood before it ever touched the ground. There's a sort of accidental science behind mould resistance, you know. Modern research, interestingly enough, confirms what those medieval builders discovered purely by trial and error. Wood tar, as it turns out, contains phenols and organic acids that actually inhibit fungal growth. These compounds disrupt mould metabolism and prevent spores from taking hold. The oil-like consistency also repels water, which, as you might guess, cuts off mould's primary fuel source. The real genius here is that medieval people didn't fight mould after it appeared. They prevented it entirely. That's a lesson modern construction often forgets. Honestly, prevention beats repair every single time. So, why did modern buildings forget this lesson? Well, industrialization changed priorities, plain and simple. Speed replaced patience, and cheap materials took the place of longevity. Chemical preservatives came later, many of them, unfortunately, toxic and short-lived. Builders stopped thinking in generations and started thinking in decades. The medieval timber dip required time, you see. Wood had to be prepared, treated and dried properly, and that just doesn't fit fast construction schedules. But the cost of skipping that step shows up later in mould remediation, structural repairs, and, let's be honest, health problems caused by damp buildings. Ironically, some modern eco-builders are now rediscovering these ancient methods, precisely because they work without poisoning people or the environment. What made this method so durable? The key, really, was depth. The dip didn't just sit on the surface, it bonded with the wood. Even if the outer layer wore away, the inner fibres remained protected. That's why archaeologists still find ancient wooden elements with preserved cores. Another factor was timing. Timber was often treated while still green, which allowed for better absorption. Modern builders, on the other hand, often treat wood after it's dried, and that limits penetration. Medieval builders instinctively understood that timing mattered. Why does this still matter today? Well, mould is a modern crisis. Homes trap moisture, buildings are sealed tight, and wood can rot quietly behind walls. The medieval timber dip reminds us that durability isn't about complexity. It's about respecting materials and working with their nature. Ancient builders didn't fight wood, they enhanced it. They used heat, resin and patience to turn a vulnerable material into something resilient. That mindset is timeless. The forgotten wisdom beneath our feet, some of the strongest lessons in building, aren't hidden in textbooks. They're standing right in front of us in ancient structures that simply refuse to fall apart. The medieval timber dip wasn't magic. It was observation refined into method. And maybe the real lesson isn't just about mould. It's about slowing down, learning from materials, and building for the long run, instead of just the next inspection. If you enjoyed uncovering this forgotten technique and want more ancient wisdom that still works today, make sure you subscribe to Ancient Roots Uncovered. Share this with someone who loves history, craftsmanship, or just smarter living. Because honestly, the past still has a lot to teach us, if we're willing to listen.